I think the first thing that would be fantastic, if I can start with you, Kate, is to introduce yourselves to our audience in terms of who you are and where you work, etc., what you do.
So my name's Kate Jones. I'm the CIO at Cadent. Cadent runs half of the UK's gas distribution networks. We are very focused on engineering and quite predominantly male in what we do.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Anne-Marie Scott. I'm the Director of Manufacturing and Industrial at Google Cloud. What that means is we have a number of segmentations, and I look after engineering and automotive, energy and utilities, and also business services and healthcare and life sciences. And I have an interesting perspective whereby I work with many of you in an industry that's very male dominated, and also in technology, which just happens to be very male dominated as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Nivani Govinder. My pronouns are she, her. I work in Google Cloud as well, very closely with Anne-Marie. I'm the head of manufacturing and industrial marketing for UK and Ireland. Originally from South Africa, I recently moved up to London in October, so still getting to know UK and London post-COVID, which is interesting. But I also come from a management consulting and investment banking background, heavily in mining and other industrial areas, so very much know the male-dominated world as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Lacey Montague. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Gentrack. Gentrack provides technology software to energy retailers. And I've been in UK energy industry for 15 years and all that comes with that.
Fabulous. So great selection of utilities and technology. So that's brilliant. So the idea of this panel this evening was to talk a bit about career stories and how your networks help. Maybe, Lacey, if I can start with you. Most defining moments in your career to date?
Wow, that was a really difficult question. I did think about this. So I'm gonna say that it's probably, when I joined Gentrack in 2018, it was off the back of Gentrack acquiring an analytics company that I had spent 7 years, blood, sweat, and tears, kind of building from scratch with a business partner. And that was obviously an exciting, defining moment to have poured so much of my time and effort into something. But I think the most exciting part of that process was, and this is kind of a sad slash a momentous time for me, but I walked into a room during the sale process when we were trying to sell the business, and I was the only woman in the room, and I walked in with my business partner, who he and I were selling the business together, and they pointed me at the coffee and told me where I could go get him his coffee. And he turned around and said, no, mate, she's the expert. It was one of those moments that I felt both sad, but also, you feel proud that you kind of stood up, even though you had all the challenges to get there. But that also, there are some allies, great allies out there, that you can rely on.
Yeah. Fantastic. Any of you ladies want to build on that question?
I think a similar story for me. I was in investment banking, enjoying it, doing really well, mergers and acquisitions. I sold a diamond mine in South Africa, which owns 10% of the coastline of South Africa. So really learning a lot, but it was tough in terms of being in mining, because besides the sexism, which I think most of you can relate to, South Africa, racism is very, very prevalent. So a lot of that. But I think for me, the key defining moment was when I sat in a boardroom meeting with the leaders of the banking team I worked with, and they all didn't look like me. And I felt I didn't have a space to go there. The ceiling was, too high. Time to change careers, which is when I moved to management consulting instead. I still continued on the mining side, unfortunately, fortunately. But I think for me, I started slowly realizing, based on those experiences, I still didn't know what I wanted, but those moments make you realize what you don't want or what you're not prepared to deal with. And that pivots your career towards a different direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have similar sort of kind of key moments where you do pivot and you're working in an environment that's very toxic, And I've taken myself out of those environments quite a few times and decided to do something positive and go and work somewhere where I'm valued. And every time I've done that, it's been absolutely the right thing to do. And I remember at one point I had a lady boss who was really inexperienced, and she was very unkind to me and the rest of the team. And her boss was actually bullying her, and so it sort of cascaded down. And I got to the point where actually I spent 2 days crying. I'm not a person who cries. My husband was like, what is going on here? And I said, I've been told I'm not performing because I didn't open my calendar up to this lady the day that she asked me to open the calendar up to her. And I just decided I am not working in an environment where you're penalised for doing a good job, but not towing the line that somebody else has defined as being acceptable. So I got up and I left, and I said to the male boss, I said, I know I'm really good at my job, and I don't care about you, I'm leaving. And that was it. I upped and left. So and got a really good job after that.
And I suppose for myself, I touched on it earlier chatting to some of you. I think for me, one of the most defining moments was I thought I had a really good career probably about 10, 15 years ago. I was really proud of myself. And my boss came over to me one day and said, I'm just coming to tell you about your pay rise. And I'm like, yes, pay rise time is really good. And he said, I'm giving you a 25% pay rise. And I'm like, that's bloody fantastic. I knew I was doing a good job and it's all being valued. And then he turned around to me and said, oh, I'm just putting you on the same salary as the men. And I just went from being up here to down here. And I just thought, wow. So I can't complain about the boss who gave me the pay rise. He was doing the right thing. But when you get that reality check, and I've been at this company for quite a few years, I'm like, how much money have I lost? And I'd had children at this company, and it's because I'd basically been on maternity leave and they'd skipped me. So I went from being really happy to really not very happy, and I'm using polite words here. And that was when I decided that I needed to go and work for another company that actually valued women, because that organisation, that one person, that ally, valued women, but the organisation itself had a long way to go, and I wasn't in a position to make an impact.
Yeah. And it's, like you say, there's the moments where you're like, yay, no. Like yours, Lacey. When Sarah was telling us the story, she sort of openly admitted she didn't really have a plan. Did any of you sort of start your career with a career plan of some form of, and how did it go? No, there's lots as well. No.
I didn't have a career plan, but I did have a plan that by the time I was 30, I was going to be earning my age. And by the time I was 40, I was going to be earning twice my age, because I wanted to earn as much as the men, very kind of similar to Marie, sort of. I knew that all the men around me were being paid more than I was. And I was damn determined that whatever I did, I'd be paid the same as what my peers were doing. So, yeah.
It's a good ambition to have. I can identify with that one as well. I did a similar thing.
That really is quite eerie, because for me, there's a particular point. So I didn't have a career plan. I kind of stumbled into IT. I was a techie in my early days. And I remember, because I took an unorthodox route into technology, and I didn't get a degree. And I remember talking to a male colleague who was 30. And I remember having the conversation with him, and I was thinking, where am I going to get? And I was working on a technical help desk, and he was telling me he earned £30,000 a year. And quite a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, that was loads of money. It's still a good salary today, but it was loads of money back then. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I can earn £30,000 by the time I'm, whatever, then that's going to be my ceiling. That's as far as I can go. And so in my head, I was like, that's all I'm worth. I'm worth £30,000 for however long my career is. So I had no career plan, and I kind of stumbled my way along for quite a long time. But it's quite funny that we have the same example.
I love that. I think for me, I tried to have a career plan. It was a corner office, power suit and heels, but I didn't know what job would get me. So I kind of figured out along the way, you speak to people, what's trendy at the time. So when I was studying, I did actuarial science, which was incredibly boring because it's insurance and morbidity and mortality. So I figured out I liked finance from that, went into investment banking, figured out investment banking was too much a male-dominated world, try to go use my experience and get into consulting. But then I started realizing that the world is changing around me, right? There's technologies coming up, maybe that's something I should get into, so I started looking at that. And then I realized no point in having a career plan. The world is changing so fast, so just kind of follow what you can along the way, learn from people around you, but try to have a plan in terms of growing and learning. I think that for me has helped me to go. So literally, I do marketing at Google. I don't have any marketing background before Google, right? So for me, that's like, I've reinvented my career 3 times. So that basically is my career plan.
And she does do a good job, by the way.
I did actually have a plan. It was a ridiculous plan that I was going to work for the FBI. I did accountancy, and I wanted to do forensic accountancy and, catch the next Al Capone kind of thing. But anyway, and then I moved to England and found the utilities industry, and I'm clearly not working for the FBI. So there you go.
I love it. So again, building on what Sarah's saying, looking back, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? We can go back and go, left the room, and I wish I'd have said this, or I could have done that, or why didn't I take that opportunity? With that in mind, if you could go back now in a time machine, what would you say? What advice would you give to your younger self? Because that might be quite interesting, I think, for some of our audience who are younger.
Well, if I make a start on it then, so for me, my biggest piece of advice was don't set your own ceiling, because as soon as you say, oh, that's as high as I can go, you put yourself into that mindset. So every opportunity that's presented to you, every time somebody does try to encourage you, if you kind of think, that's my ceiling, I can't go any higher, then you're actually not doing yourself any favours at all. It's hard enough as it is. But if you set yourself there and you don't think that you can do more, then you will work to the ceiling you think so. So if I would absolutely say, ignore what you think you can do, go and try it, because that's what men do. It's scientifically proven. If there's an opportunity, men will go and do it, and women will go, oh no, I don't think we can. Be confident and just go for it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that is probably the absolute biggest challenge. And I think, all talked about imposter syndrome before and all these things. And I think maybe one of the ways to do that is to identify those people in your life, maybe they're mentors or coaches, that can encourage you and continue to help you understand where you're strong. Because you do need to continue to hear someone tell you, no, you are actually capable of this, because there are plenty of people. There always are. There are every single day. There's somebody telling me I'm not capable, I'm not good enough. Most of them are men, but it's a competitive world out there, and we just need to find those allies. I called one yesterday because I just knew I needed like a pep talk, just a little one, and yeah, you need that sometimes.
Yeah, and that sort of leads into my other question about the power of a network. I think you do need to have a tribe, don't you? You need to have that person who when you ring up was always there to sort of help elevate you or pick you up when you're down. Any other experiences that you guys can share about maybe the power of a network, or how you valued that kind of experience?
Yep, I can talk a little bit about that. I think it is very lonely if you come from a background where you don't have, the right family with the right connections, trying to break into a world where it's very different to the generations before you. So I think building that network as you go is really important, getting the allies, getting the sponsors, getting the coaches. But I think it's also important for us to lift each other up when we can. So I'm very fortunate. I worked at Google since 2016, and we launched a program called I Am Remarkable, which is all about self-empowerment, which I didn't realize was a thing, and I didn't realize I was really bad at it until I did the workshop. I'm now a facilitator. I launched it in Africa in 2017, and trained hundreds of folks in this self-promotion skills, basically. And I think for us, we're now putting it into practice where it's not just speaking up for yourself and letting everybody know, this is what I'm achieving and this is what I'm capable of, but also recognizing other people. And if there is, a woman in your team or any underrepresented group, is to help them, that's your network now, right? So help them rise up with you by shouting out and saying, hey, you did a great job on this. I think those day-to-day kind of recognitions for me is what really builds a strong network, and we kind of identify and connect with people that way.
Yeah. And we've been fortunate as a Women's Utility Network to do an I Am Remarkable event. Anybody in the room go to the I Am Remarkable? Yeah, a few hand shows. So
awesome.
It was amazing, absolutely.
So I'm ashamed to say I never joined a women's network. I'm very stoic. I was going to make it on my own. But actually, very recently, I've just started a Women in IT group for the women who work for me, and it's really helpful to share those experiences because we've all had them, and it's amazing to hear the moments, where I told my boss, I've had enough of you, I'm out of here. How many other people have had similar experiences, and just being able to talk about it and make everybody feel that, well, I say it's normal. I wish that nobody in this room would have that experience because it shouldn't be considered normal. But we've all had them, and by supporting and helping each other, we can actually make it a much better working environment for everybody.
Yes.
And just to conclude from myself on Women's Network, I feel like we're cut from the same cloth, Kate, because I never used to utilise women's networks either. In fact, there weren't any for such a long time. And I'd say it probably only started change 7 or 8 years ago. And at that point, I kind of thought, I'm fine. I've got to where I am now. I don't need to. But it might not be necessarily so much for me now. It's actually about supporting other women and actually showing what is possible, because I've spent a lot of time helping others, but maybe not on the scale that a women's network can actually support it. So for me, it's the rate of change has been quite phenomenal the last couple of years. And if I look back to my early days, how would have I been if I'd had a women's network or a mentor or something to be able to leverage to actually get me where I could have been versus where I am today? And I'm very happy where I am today. But then you do sometimes think, well, if I'd have had those other opportunities, where could I be? Or could I have done something differently for others? So for me, the Women's Network is really powerful to really open doors and actually encourage one another to do things we might not necessarily do.
That's fabulous. Yeah, totally agree. That's why we're here, isn't it? So one final question in a sort of the things we talked about before today. I shared the Women in the Workplace article, and I don't know if any of you are listening to the one podcast, but myself, Joe, and the fellow founders, we recorded a podcast talking about the article, the Women in the Workplace. If you haven't listened to it, I'd go in and recommend, and also go and read the article because there's quite a lot of research in there, and it talked about 2 key things that resonated with us, and that is, in this new world of work coming out of COVID, women are more predisposed to be at burnout because we are trying to help one another. We are trying to help promote diversity and inclusivity. And it also talked about the broken rung. So we might get up on the first rung, but we might not get on the second or the third, etc. There's a rung missing. Any sort of thoughts in terms of, did that resonate with you? And what do you think we can do about that for the future of work?
I think the burnouts. I guess as we've gone through lockdown, I've had periods where I thought, if I sit in front of a computer screen for another day, I think I'm going to lose the plot. And I'm sure we've all had those moments. But I think the broken rung, I think being sat at home, you lose the context of the company you work for and the people you work with, and being face to face and having those interactions is really important. I think it's really important for women to get your face known, because it's too easy to be marginalised, and I know that some of the women in my team, they'll go on meetings and there'll be 10, 15 men and 1 or 2 women, and it's so much easier to ignore somebody on a Teams meeting or a Google meeting than it is when they're in the room and being present. And I think that presence is really important, and as we move back into more normal ways of working, then everyone should take the opportunity to really make sure you go to those important meetings. You don't think, it'd be easy just to stay at home. You get out there, you get your face known, and build your brand.
I think in terms of the burnout side as well, it's a lot more around the different burdens placed on women during the pandemic, the caregiver aspect, which Sarah spoke about earlier. I think it's also changing the mindset around well-being and what it means for me. If I'm at home, with whatever I need to, but I need to shut off and I'm not able to shut off because I still feel I need to prove myself, it becomes a lot more stressful to do that. But I think for us, or for me personally at Google, the DEI also picked up a lot more since George Floyd, and that was like February 2020, March 2020 that happened. And I think all companies started looking at it a lot more around what can we do around racial equity, what can we do around all the other kind of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. But all of those were done in addition to your day job, right? It wasn't like you were paid extra or given extra hours to focus on that and remove the rest of your workload. A lot of us picked up that in addition to your normal workload, and it was already long working hours because pandemic, everybody worked longer hours. So I think that mindset as well put a lot of pressure on people to try and change the world basically while you're doing a full-time job, and that leads to more burnout issues and things as well, which I personally felt, and I know a few of the diversity equity initiative folks at many companies that I've chatted to, my friends and things, are feeling the same as well.
I'll comment on the broken rung because I read that article, and when I first sort of read the definition of broken rung, I thought I tried to think back to if I had any direct experience of that, and I couldn't quite think of any. But when the metrics were staggering, they were quite interesting. I was actually shocked. I didn't expect to see it when you saw the entry level split by gender and how it drops off as you get into these senior management levels. And that struck me immediately as being a little bit about potentially our own confidence, that point you make about setting our own ceiling, the way that we view ourselves and put ourselves forward for roles, and then potentially the way that society sees what leadership and management should look like. And what immediately came to my mind was I had a boss tell me that he felt I wasn't acting in a leadership capacity because I was too much part of my team. And I was like too much involved in their problems and part of the team, and I needed to rise myself above them or something like that. And I just remember sitting there thinking, that is a compliment. Like, that is not, I don't see that as a lack of leadership. I see that as the opposite. It was just a strange conversation to be had, so when I saw that McKinsey drop off in the statistics, that was the first thing that came to my mind was this. And then as I read the article, they talked about how women are starting to shift what a leader actually looks like, and I thought that was really, really powerful.
Yeah. For myself, the broken rung does resonate really strongly with me. In fact, I think I saw it on LinkedIn, and I put some comments around it. So when I started out, I mentioned that I was technical when I started out a few years ago, and I worked with a number of male colleagues. In fact, I was the only woman other than the HR lady in a relatively small company. And I worked on a technical help desk, and the guys, they would quite often get to do all what I class as the fun stuff. You might argue it. They'd get to build PCs, and I would often be the ones left to answer the phones. They would get to go to customer sites, and it'd be like I'd be left to do the filing. They'd get to create the cat cabling, and I really am showing my age now, and I would be left to do some other tea-making activities because there'd be a meeting with the execs in the office. So I was always there, shall we say, doing the stereotypical role. And I used to get really angry and frustrated because I'm like, I want to do that. Why am I not doing that? And the only thing I can put it down to was because I was a girl. I was a young lady in a relatively small company, which was male-dominated. And the male execs would... I would say not be employed. I think if they worked for a corporate, they were very sexist, and the sort of comments they used to come out with were really totally unacceptable. But for me, I didn't know what was acceptable. It was a small company, and I just thought, oh, is this how all companies work? And actually, my first work experience, I stayed at this company for a couple of years, was actually, I just thought, that's okay. It's okay for a person to treat another person like that. It's okay that obviously I'm a girl, so I must make the tea, and I must always do the filing, and actually I must be treated like an object. That's kind of how I thought it was. So for me, the broken rung really does sort of make me think back. And I hadn't actually thought about it as much as I did until I read that article. And it kind of made me angry, really angry, to the point where I'm like, do you know what, that cannot happen again. And if we don't do these sort of things, then actually it has the risk of actually carrying on in certain institutions, and certainly companies that don't have the rigours that certainly larger corporates or even companies who are willing to change.
No, I think so. If you haven't read the article, you can see that it creates a lot of. Do go and read it. You will find it fascinating. And I just want to open it up to the audience. Is anybody got any questions they would like to ask any of our panel? Again, these ladies are going to stay for some refreshments, so you can go up one-to-one if you're all shy. Looks the case. They're just desperate to go for a drink, I think. Get on.
So, I get it, right? Everything that you've said, yeah, thank you. Green, can I have a different colour? I get it. Everything that you've said, it resonates. You know, I'm a believer, I'm sold. What can we do? And the specific question I want to ask is, what can we do about pay? Because you go in and have the conversation, and, you know, I've never had an experience like Sarah. No one's ever said, you know, here's an extra however much. It's always been, or what fifth of the job aren't you going to do, or anything like that. It's always been, well, actually, this is your OPEX, this is the size of your team, this is all the reasons why not. And it ends up being a conversation about, you know, a really devaluing conversation about why you're not worth it, rather than a positive conversation about why you are. So, and I recognise that there's, you know, cultural things, and it's not like that in every organisation, but I think that everybody's probably had that experience at least once. So what can we do?
I kind of had that experience very recently. I got told I was getting a pay rise, quite significant, because I've been doing the job well. And then I got told, but by the way, the market rate's actually another X more than what you're paid, but you won't get paid that yet. You won't get paid that for another 6 months or whatever. And I think if I was a man, I'd have gone, what the heck? That's not acceptable. But I kind of, okay, yeah, that's all right. So I think even now, and I was talking to my team about it, I'm going to get us all to go on some negotiation training, because that's what we need to do. We need to stand up for ourselves and be confident about it, and not be ashamed, because that's what certainly the men in our organisation would do. They'd never accept that. They'd never go, yeah, that's all right. I won't accept the going rate for the job I'm doing, or I'll accept a bonus that's slightly less than everyone else, because I don't think I've really done everything I set out to this year. You know, that sort of attitude. Yeah.
Too modest, yeah. And I would echo the negotiation training. I was fortunate to be invited back to Oxford University. They do a women's leadership programme there, and they had a specialist negotiator in for a half-day training session. It was amazing. Yeah, so watch out anybody who works with me going forward. But I always think there's a don't ask, don't get. And I think we need to be braver.
Sorry, Hayley, can I just add something to that? Because I think it's also about having women on boards.
Yeah.
Because one of the things it's great having the power as a CEO. We addressed our gender pay gap in the first 12 months, but we did that because we were really open about it as a board, and we had the honest conversations. So I think if you have women at executive and board level, you don't accept that. You change it for everybody else within your organisation.
I changed it for everyone else, but not myself.
I think was there another hand up just there as well? Does somebody want to carry us behind you there?
Well, I was actually going to make a similar point. I think it's a systemic issue. I mean, there probably are. I'm an executive coach, so yes, there probably are skills and negotiation skills that you can develop. But I think there's a systemic issue here, as you know, Sarah was saying. There is also a choice that companies can make. Do you actually want to get rid of your gender pay gap? I think there's also, it's probably exacerbated in this country. British people don't like talking about money. We're embarrassed, and so, you know, often people will run that conversation and try and get out the door really quickly because they're like, oh, I can't believe I'm talking about money. So there's something there that our culture doesn't help. And I say this, my husband's Australian, and when we got together, one of the first things he asked me was, how much do you earn? And I'm so I do think we're at a huge disadvantage. And I mean, one of the things that always strikes me is one of the reasons the Nordic countries have less of a gender pay gap is because people's pay is actually published. Their tax returns are published. But could you imagine British people doing that? So maybe we have to just get better at being open with each other.
Talking about it more.
Earn.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Your question. So, oh no, we do have a question down that end.
Hiya. It's brilliant to hear from all of you, and a lot of what you've said has really, really resonated with me. I've had some issues at the minute with trying to get into a room. So obviously I work in quite a male-dominated team, and they strike up a lot of friendships around common interests, which I find often I don't share. Do you have any advice for sort of how to force might be too strong of a word, but get yourself into those conversations? Because often opportunities come around as a result of, building those connections.
Well, if I sort of make a start on that, it's a great question, because I have the challenge also with colleagues and clients and in every possible guise. For a long time, I did suffer a bit of an imposter syndrome. I do like football. I am going to talk about football. Yeah, it's great. And actually, in reality, as much as I find football interesting, it's a bit meh, as my daughter would say. It's like, yeah, it's great, but I'd quite happily talk about plenty of other things. So for me, I still suffer a little bit, because you have to find that common ground. And if you can get that common ground, it can then spawn other conversation. Because then, for example, you talk about football, great. Well, then you start maybe getting into a fitness conversation. Oh, by the way, and what do you do at the weekend? Oh, and you watch the football? Do you play football? And oh, okay. So what else do you do at the weekend? So I just try to use it as a door opener and kind of do the polite bit of conversation, then lead it on to something else, and actually try to bring it into a different area, because we do work in a diverse environment. And actually, I was chatting to somebody just last week, and it was a lady, and she started talking about football, and I'm like, I don't believe it. I was just like, here we are, I'm talking about football. But it was great, because my bias was kind of suddenly switched on of, okay, I was going to talk about something completely different. And actually it was like, well, no, they were genuinely interested. So it kind of sometimes goes both ways. But I would also say use it as an opportunity to open the door, but lead the conversation a different way. So you're not stuck about, who's top of the table or whatever it might be.
So I had a similar experience early on in my career. I was like, I'm going to learn how to play golf, so I can be a part of those weekend golf trips and all of that stuff. Nope, I tried, I hated it, gave up very quickly. But it is tough. It's tough when they're making plans, and it's like, oh, we're all meeting up, and then you kind of overhear it's happening, and you're like, why wasn't I invited? And then it's pretty obvious why you weren't invited. I think a lot has changed since that was early part of my career. A lot has changed since then. For us, I think as a team, we are very inclusive around, or try to be very inclusive around team activities, what we do, what we talk about. For example, some of us don't ride a bike, so we're not going to go out biking and checking out London, right? So we make sure we run surveys, or we polls to kind of get a pulse check on where we're going to be going to. For example, I'm vegan, so we're not going to a steakhouse if it's going to be a team dinner. So I think just speaking up, reminding folks around there's other people in the team too. They look like you and have the same hobbies as you, does help, but you will be excluded, I think, from some things. Just that's unfortunately how male-dominated world works. But try to find the common ground, as Anne-Marie said, lead it the other way, and that works as well. So for example, we went to an offsite in Paris, and they had a walking tour in Louvre, and there was a pottery class, and the pottery class had more men in it than women, which was really interesting, right? But it was something that everybody could do. You didn't have to have any special skills or anything significant that you had to think about. So kind of coming up with those kinds of thoughtfulness around inclusion, I think, will help you to push the right conversations. Yeah.
Thanks, Nivani. Thanks very much. And on that note, I'm going to bring it to a close now, because we're going to go out for some networking. But please do go and have a chat with our fantastic panel here over a drink and some nibbles. A round of applause, please, for our panel. Thank you.